waiting for, what we have to say here. All right, good afternoon. We are here today in Senate Rules to talk about our return to the State House in person and what the steps we need to put in place so that people feel comfortable and safe returning to work. And so my office met with Secretary Bloomer yesterday to talk about a lot of the different points of discussion for us. The expectation was we were going to discuss today. I don't think we need to take a vote today. I think there might be some more information we need to gather. But I thought at this point I would turn it over to Secretary Bloomer to take you through sort of the decision-making points for us. Does that sound good?
Good.
Okay. John?
Thank you, Senator. So I'm going to try to give you try to be brief on where we're at and what that kind of means. It may be shocking to some of you if you haven't really thought about it recently, and then talk about what we've been talking to IT, the Sergeant at Arms office, as what can be done in the Senate chamber, some alternatives, sort of our baseline setup, same idea with the committee rooms. And so the default position, or where I'd start, is it may, given that everybody's so busy, it may have slipped some people's radar, but if you do nothing, you're back in person. If you do nothing, you're back with no audio, no video. Everything is pyramided off from resolutions that you have passed in the last couple months, and then from last year from the rules, because we have SR 12, which permits you to use Senate Rule 9A and Senate Rule 32A. Last year, or the last biennium, when COVID first hit, the Senate put into effect temporary rules on both the Senate sessions and on the committees meetings, and that gave a lot of authority to the Senate Rules Committee, to decide when it was remote, when it wasn't remote, what the parameters were. There were some overall guidelines within those temporary rules, but it was fleshed out by the overall the Senate Rules Committee and what IT could do and what was available. When this new session began in 2021, what happened was those rules were adopted as permanent, and then there was a temporary resolution passed which gave you the authority to act underneath those emergency rules. They're only triggered when there's a state of emergency, and so you may remember that through 2021 those were in effect, and then toward the end of the session they were extended till the first Friday you were back. There was, and that's where, when you came back, you then did Senate Resolution 12, which extends it up through February 25th, next Friday. And as I say, almost everything that's been done pyramids from those resolutions and the underlying rule. The custom and tradition of the Senate and the past rules committees there's no electronics in the chamber, there's no electronics in the committee. I mean, there's no broadcasting in the committee rooms, there's no remote access, there's no hybrids. All of that stuff sort of pyramids from use of these emergency rules and powers granted into the Senate Rules Committee. So I'll give you that.
John, in order for us to do a similar version to what's happening right now in the other body, then we would need to pass some other rules before the Senate Rules Committee or before the whole chamber.
So generally, what you would need to do, and there are a couple different avenues, would be to extend the deadline in Senate Resolution 12, which would then grant a lot more power to the Senate Rules Committee to make similar ones. It may be slightly differently worded, because you might want to make sure that if you decide to not do one thing, you can do another thing. But generally, you need to at least extend, probably introduce it next Tuesday or Wednesday, so that you know when that date is when you meet next Thursday. Because when you meet next Thursday and you make decisions, you'll want to know what power you have or what you don't have. But underlying it all is that if you do nothing, come next Friday, you're going to be back the way this building performed 3 years ago.
Thank you. That's a really important thing, the timeline for us to be aware of. We need to have something coming to the floor next Tuesday or Wednesday that will give us the power then on Thursday to make the decision for what comes next. Okay. Senator Clarkson?
Thank you. John, do I understand you correctly, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that it would be simpler at this point to extend Rule 12, SR Rule 12, and extend that for a period with asking people to come back in person, but your implication is that there are a lot of rules affected if we want to come back in a hybrid fashion, if we want to come back with electronics in committees and on the floor, that may be a bit more work, and that we want to wait to do that. It would be simpler to function under Rule 12 for longer. Is that what I'm hearing you say, or not?
So I think that you need to extend what was done in Senate Resolution 12, and that's just extend the date. The question becomes, do you want to put any parameters on what can be done on the Rules Committee? And that's, I hope I'm going to run through some options going forward on the 8th, and then you can decide when you talk to your caucuses, how do you get the extension? Do they want to give you broad authority, unfettered authority, or are there any kind of parameters you want to have on what authority is granted to the Senate Rules Committee? And all I know is you need to extend it if you don't want to be back the way you were 3 years ago. And I sense, and that includes YouTube broadcast the committee rooms, because that pyramids, you can do that separately. If you decide to come back like 3 years ago, next Thursday, you could pass or suggest that the Senate rules or the floor in general pass a resolution that allows them to be broadcast. I mean, you can change that, but historically we have not allowed anything live from a committee room, anything live from the floor. So you need to do something. One alternative is to just extend the date.
Yeah, so that's what I'm hearing you say, is that it might be simpler at this point until we know what we want long term to just extend the date.
Yeah. So I mean, it's an option, and then.
And wait, can I just ask a second part to that?
Sure.
Second, extend the date to middle of May. Extend the date till when? What would you suggest? Because once you change Senate rules on some of these other expectations, what's permanent and what's just for this what's just for this COVID period. I think those are some of the things we may want to grapple with. Why it would be easier to extend the date.
So I sometimes get myself, well, I'm going to tell you what I actually think. How's that sound? So it's really it's really a political decision. And so, I mean, my suggestion would be, if there's any kind of uncertainty and trying to find out what should be done or not be done, that you do it for a few weeks to see how it works, or a month. If the political decision is that you want to do it till the adjournment, that's fine. What I hear from listening to senators are most people want to be back in the building. Maybe there's going to be some tinkering. If you are having an issue as to how to resolve all those differences, you put it in for a certain number of weeks until people start coming back. And then you have the second dialogue. It's either it's going to work really well or it's not, and you can adjust it. And you don't have people arguing about, well, why did we do it originally till May or not? That's my blunt assessment, but I don't want to get too much into the political as to what you all feel is appropriate. I just see that you have both options and there's pros and cons to both. I mean, I think there's a lot of decisions to be made, and I'm not sure if you want to kick the can so far down to May as versus maybe the end of March and then be able to revisit it.
Okay.
Yes, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Can I just get a clarification then? What's necessary to extend the date?
It needs a resolution passed on the Senate floor.
On the Senate. Okay, thank you.
So now I don't want to run out of time because I want to make sure I cover at least some of what we're looking at and preparing for you in both the chamber and in the committee rooms, because with my conversations with various senators, people have a broad spectrum of how comfortable they are and how comfortable they're not. So you also need to know that you passed 2 resolutions earlier this past year. One still requires mask mandates. So no matter what, for the senators in the Senate chamber and in the Senate committee rooms. So regardless of what the joint rules decides, regardless of what the House decides, the Senate at this point, until those are overruled or withdrawn, they're in effect till next January, that you have to have masks in the Senate chamber and you have to have masks in the Senate committee rooms. And that can be enforced on the public, and that is still existing, and that's your decision to make. Similarly, there's a vax or a testing policy. So all senators have to either be vaxxed or tested to be allowed on the Senate floor or in the committee rooms as senators. They still could come in as members of the public. It's just a matter of being on the floor or in their committee rooms. I will tell you that generally speaking, the very vast majority of people have complied. So anyone who hasn't needed tested, all the senators who've been in the building are either vaxxed or been tested on a weekly basis and comply with that resolution. There are provisions in those resolutions are what happens if you're in violation. So you decide to show up without a mask on, you refuse to put it on, or it causes something. You have a personal preference against it. The resolution you passed says that we're supposed to provide some sort of means of access for you to participate remotely in your committee and on the Senate floor. We recommended that in the Senate Secretary's office rather than get in a fight as to whether or not you're denying someone the opportunity to vote. So when we've looked at, I give you that as background because when we've looked at your return to the Senate itself, we're starting with that as the parameter. And you guys over the next week can discuss further what you want to do. But what we are currently looking at is everybody back, other than those who are not vaxxed, not tested, refuse a mask, or are actually probably currently diagnosed with COVID. Now you have to remember, if you go back to the way it was 3 years ago, if you had the flu, you could still come in. Your cohorts may not like it, but you could come in, broken leg, the flu, whatever. So the thing here becomes COVID is a little bit different. If you went back fully to just in person, then you really can't restrict people from being on the floor for testing positive or with COVID or having a positive diagnosis. So the thought we would recommend is that there be some sort of, whatever's done with the rules, an ability for those who are tested positive that they can remotely participate. So that's sort of your baseline that we would recommend. And I would hope that all senators, if they were tested, would say, all right, I won't come in. It's very difficult to restrict them from the floor, but if you give them the alternative or the opportunity to participate remotely, then most of the senators are very well behaved. I think they will continue to do so. Now, with that in mind, the setup is we're getting rid of most everything. We have an understanding that you want to go and broadcast your sessions, and so in that sense, there will be 3 cameras. The current idea is one on the lieutenant governor. You've sort of seen the cameras will improve during the town meeting week because we're getting better ones in, get a little better picture. But there'll be 2 cameras on the chamber. They look really small. Now, as I look at you all, we look really small, but remember there are 6 or 7 screens. There's only 3. And so everybody gets a lot bigger because you'll just have three squares that are going to be out there and broadcast. So I think they're going to be fine. It's as if you're standing up in your chair. There'll be 1 on each bank. Then there's the issue of what do we suggest, or what have we been looking at for dealing with those who won't mask, won't be vaxxed, or for some reason are diagnosed positively with COVID. Our suggestion is that they're not going to be part of the committee meeting, honestly. So the broadcast out on the YouTube will be those 3 channels. We've been talking to IT. It's evolved over the last day or two, and it actually evolved since I spoke last with Senator Balint. But the idea is you can set up a screen, and they will be on a screen that will then have their picture on them and broadcast. So if there's a senator from Rutland that can't make it, I've been diagnosed positive, there'll be a screen that'll come in. They will have a feed that IT will set up that they'll be shown in the room. They'll be recognized. You can see them stand up. They'll be the only person on the screen, and they'll be there virtually. And then when they stand up and they speak, their screen will be there and they'll be picked up by the cameras. No different than if Senator Clarkson stands up in the Windsor district and speaks. If she was not going to be here for a floor session, we would probably actually put the screen behind her seat. It's a little different when it's somebody in the front row, but people in the back row, it's a pretty good size screen, and it would probably be bigger than real life. But that keeps us from having to worry about who's getting FaceTime, who's not getting FaceTime on the screen. We have done throughout the 30 screens, so all the senators are on there, different than the House. But the problem becomes if somebody's at home and you're here in the chamber, there are 3 screens, Lieutenant Governor, 2 other ones. Now, They'll be the people at home will get bigger screens. They'll get more FaceTime, let's say. And so in that sense, we've been trying to create equality across all the senators, whether they're in person or whether they're remote. So that's our sort of current suggestion on the setup. We have looked into, if for some reason the separate screen doesn't work, we've also looked into allowing people to come in, but having their monitor off unless they're speaking, and doing like a speaker view. So that's the baseline. If you decided to add more, our baseline we're looking at is people that won't mask, people that won't vaccinate or test, or people that are positively diagnosed with COVID. The House, for comparison, is a little broader. It's a little squishy, the language they've been using, but meaning that if you have COVID-related concerns, you don't have to come in. And nobody ever asks who, what, when, and where. The problem with some of that is one person's COVID-related may be different than another's, but that's a decision you'll have to make. And how do you decide whether or not that's appropriate or not? You do realize that if it's really everybody's in person, other than those who have screens for them, we might be able to fit two. People will know that they're not there, that they're there. They have to be there for COVID related. Unlike now, you can either show up in the chamber, a few people do, or you're remote. If you're going to be remote in the future after the 8th, you're claiming that you're there remotely for COVID related issues or COVID diagnosis or some one of the other categories with masking or testing. So that's a very fast, I'm sorry, because we don't have a lot of time, very fast overview of where we're starting. You can add, if you're given the authority, you can add more, but that's sort of the baseline that we're recommending and starting from.
And this doesn't preclude anybody who's remote from voting. We are allowed to vote remotely now. We will be allowed to vote remotely then as well.
That's a decision that we'll make next week, but
Okay.
right. And so you could parse it out that you're allowing hybrid voting in committees, let's say, but you could also say that you have to be on the floor to vote. That is an option before us that we need to figure out. I mean, the other thing that Secretary Bloomer and I talked about yesterday was we could go back to a different floor schedule, and you could say we're doing, committee work exclusively. Just, for example, you do exclusive committee work Tuesday, Wednesday, do floor time Thursday, Friday, so that you could help, coordinate your life to be able to get yourself in person in order to vote. So there are a couple different ways to get at this. And so that's what we have to decide in terms of, allowing people to vote remotely or not.
Yeah. So Senator, I'm sorry, Senator Hooker, our version has you able to vote on the floor, even if you're remote for one of the 3 or 4 reasons. I think you have to be. I mean, I don't think we want to fight over if you're excluding someone that they're not being able to represent their constituents. Then it gets in. Then that was sort of the floor. Senator Balint was beginning to get into the committees, and so you're set up to run just like the House committees if you want. And so depending on what your committee decides to recommend, or what the Senate as a whole grants you authority, you can go fully in person, you can go fully remote for sometimes, but the way that we can make it flexible enough so that the Rules Committee could choose either, or you can do a hybrid. And it's easier to do a hybrid in the committee rooms than it is on the Senate floor. It's a lot easier. Our suggestion, we're setting it up as if all the committees will be back, just as a start point. So every committee will be back. We're in consultations or talking to the Sergeant at Arms office about the number of people in rooms, because people have different comfort with different numbers of people. So we're working on the numbers for the rooms, trying to decide sort of what's good for air quality, what's good for flow, and those can be sort of determined over the next week or so. Usually it's in the control of the chair. Once the number was established, we'd make sure there was only that number of chairs. There'd be some way of enforcing it. But if whatever is decided on the committees, you would still be able to vote. That's a bit different than if there's nothing that's extended. Historically, in the Senate, you could call in and listen on the phone. Technically, from our perspective in the Senate Secretary's office, you shouldn't even be participating. You can listen. Frequently, people still ask questions and still talk, but you should not vote. You don't count for the quorum, and you shouldn't be participating. That's historically. You can easily, if you decide to do some form of a hybrid, allow people to participate remotely. And actually, our suggestion would be that you're a little more flexible in the committees till people get more comfortable as they get here. And it gets, I just think it's, I think as you go along, things will either go really well and people will feel more comfortable, or you may have a slight outbreak, 3 or 4 senators, and then you're going to go back to remote until it kind of passes over. And so I think anything that alleviates individuals' fears for having being in too crowded of an area will be good. And the closeness of a committee rooms, we're trying to make sure you have some flexibility. The last little point before I take other questions is you also have some historical, some of you may remember that in the first half of a session, 5 or 8, 10 years ago, they used to meet on the floor just 2 days a week. So one of the ways you can accommodate some people's schedules and concerns about loved ones and being back and forth every day is if you did split schedule, as Senator Balint was mentioning, you could be on the floor and then just Thursday and Friday. Our suggestion would be Thursday and Friday. Don't split it up, because the idea is to keep people commuting in Montpelier at one time and then not in Montpelier at another time. But you could, and we'd sequence the days, so you got a notice calendar. You may have to do a token session on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but the action would be on just 2 days. And you would also potentially do the committee meetings in person on those 2 days, just so people got used to it, would be our suggestion. Do some kind of hybrid or remote for maybe Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday have people kind of come and get their feet wet. Now, I'm not saying you want to do that, but that is an alternative. There is some historical precedent for it, and if you're granted the authority to make decisions, you could make those decisions.
Okay, Senator Mazza.
Has the date been determined when we go back live, or is that still up in the air?
So right now, if nothing else is done, you are back live on the 8th. And we're gonna do a resolution. We'll try to get circulated to be introduced next Tuesday to extend that. And right now, I don't know what date it is, whether it's a month or whatever, but there'll be something so that you're given some authority to put whatever you want. Otherwise, if you don't pass that, you're back on the 8th.
Because we want to make sure we give people plenty of notice. I worry about that. I don't want to rush it to the 8th. If we could do it, put it off another week, it would be, that's just my.
So, Senator Clarkson.
We have been talking about going back in person on the 8th with some flexibility. That's sort of been my understanding, is that we would be back on the 8th, but with a hybrid option. And one of my questions, John, and it goes to some of Dick's concerns about witnesses. A chair could decide that all witnesses needed to participate remotely, couldn't they? I mean, they could just make that a decision.
I think that there are two. I'm going to give you a little bit two-part answer, Senator. I believe the answer is yes, but I would also think that you should have at least 1 or 2 seats available for public and for people to come in and watch, whether that's the press or the public. Yeah, I think you could easily say all witnesses are remote, but I would try to avoid having just a closed room, because then
I get that. But the question, we had decided in Senate rules, I think, that people coming into Senate spaces all had to be vaccinated and tested. How do we ensure that that's the case when all the public come into our Senate rooms? How are we making sure that that's the case?
The resolutions you passed apply to you and your staff. At this point, they don't apply to the public. It's not screened. If somebody from the public wants to come in to sit in the back of the Senate chamber, we have the plexiglass up and stuff. But if they want to come in, then there's no way of knowing if they're back.
We still haven't resolved that issue about the public and the health expectations of the public.
So the current way that the House is performing is they have the public on the balcony, only members are on the floor, but there is no testing. You wear a mask, you're not required to show a vaccine card, and you're not required to be tested if you're a member of the public at this point. And we have similar in the Senate chamber right now. We have the public on the bottom gallery, because that's where the plastic is. The upstairs, I've tried to keep just to the press, and the reason is because we know who they are. The hard part, if it's open air, I'd rather know who's sitting in open air than have the public be up there. So we restricted nobody's on the floor other than senators or staff. Public's in the lower balcony, which restricts the number, and then the upper balcony is restricted to the press currently.
So thank you, John. Randy, was that a hand?
You're muted, Randy.
He might be. I know he's like many of us. He's trying to be in two places at once, which I understand. So what I want to say is I don't want to make us late for the floor. So I think some important things for us to talk about with the respective caucuses is, how do we want to come back? Do we want to phase in? Do we want to do something similar to what the House did, which was they had several weeks of phase in? I want you to be thinking about that. What would the phase in look like? I do think for many of our senators who are feeling anxious, that might be a better way to go instead of just flipping the switch. And as Secretary Bloomer said, there are going to be kinks that we're going to have to work out. And so, again, I don't want to make us late to the floor. So I think we'll wrap this up now. But it's going to be really important that we hear from each of your caucuses so people have, the ability to weigh in.
And
Anything,
perhaps,
Randy.
you're muted.
Now, how's that?
Better.
Good. I just wanted to add that I do think we need to have further discussion regarding how we deal with the public in these areas.
Yes.
Where we are right now, if you think of where I sit in the Senate as a classic example, to have people who are unvaccinated with an unknown exposure sitting literally right behind me, less than 3 feet away, plexiglass notwithstanding, that's uncomfortable.
Right. So
Yeah.
that is going to be a issue we have to discuss within rules. There's something else to bring up with your caucuses. So I'm going to say that we're going to adjourn, and Senator Clarkson, you and I can follow up later.
Right. I think we need longer time next Thursday.
Agreed. Yes. Half hour is not going to do it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I'll see you upstairs.